Hey there, everybody. Greetings. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Ranking the Albums. Today, in the captain's chairs, because I'm just kind of along for the ride here today, we've got Steve and Reid all the way from Scotland and my fellow New Yorker, Chuck Alvarez, both of these gentlemen from in the prog seat today. They're going to be talking about a band, pretty notable band, have been around for a while, although somewhat of an underground act that I think a lot of people have heard the name. Maybe you've heard the music, maybe you haven't. They don't have a big discography, but a notable one. And these two gentlemen are going to rank that discography. We're talking about the Cardiacs. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Reid, who's got a little bit of history dump before we get started on the ranking here today.
Yeah, well, I felt it was right to maybe give a little bit of background on the Cardiacs because they're a band that a lot of people maybe know the name, but a lot of people maybe don't know so much about them. So they formed as long ago as 1977, but they only really became the Cardiacs in 1980. They released 3 demo cassettes between 80 and 83, the latter of those, the Seaside. That went on to get a full CD release, and their debut proper, A Little Man and a House and the Whole World Window. There's a lot of things here that are not very easy to say, by the way.
A Little Man and a House and the Whole World Window. That's a great title.
Yeah. And the song titles, this is quite good because people all think these two are just getting all these song titles wrong, because a lot of them make little sense when you just read them as a song title. But anyway, the debut was released in 1988, and the band revolved really around the Smith brothers. So you had Jim Smith on bass, who still seems to kind of, the band are not gone, but they're not really there. So they're still alive in some shape or form, I would suggest. And his brother, Tim. Tim sadly died in 2020. He was the guitarist, the singer, and in all honesty, the real creative force behind the band. Other notable contributors were the drummers Dominic Luckman and Bob Leith, John Poole on guitars, who's in everything from, he was in the Wild Hearts at one point, which was kind of my door into this band, the Dowling Pool, Life Signs, which is much more proggy, Tim Key on percussion, William D. Drake on keys, and amongst lots and lots and lots of others, Sarah Smith on vocals and wind instruments. Tying down a description of this band, very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to just give you one quick kind of snapshot of this is what you can expect if you put them on. Really difficult. And I'm going to go with Gentle Giant placed in a blender with the Dead Kennedys. And they sound nothing like either of those bands, but they sound nothing like anybody else either. And especially when you consider when the music was being made. So they had 5 official albums, but we've gone for 7 in the ranking because there are other notable releases. So we've included the Songs for Ships and Irons compilation, which contains a whole lot of stuff that really isn't available anywhere else on proper release. And we've also brought in the Seaside as well. So with that, there you go. That's the Cardiacs.
So I'm looking at this, right? I'm on their Wikipedia page right now, and they under genres, right?
Okay.
They list something that I have never heard before, and I'm assuming I know what it is. Prog.
Yeah, prog.
It's supposed to be prog punk.
Yeah, it's a moniker for progressive punk. It's something that Tim Smith despised, but a lot of his fans call them that. When you look at Cardiacs, so that getting away from the progressive side of it, when you actually compare them to their peers, you think about XTC, early XTC, perhaps maybe very early Wire, those 2 bands, and then also the Specials as well. If you think about those bands right there, the ska influence. Then you also think about the Sex Pistols as well, because a lot of those out in the UK were very much into the Sex Pistols, and you hear the influence of the Sex Pistols on the band as well, maybe perhaps throughout their entire career. Tim Smith, sadly, he passed away in 2020, a few weeks after his 59th birthday, but he definitely was the creative force behind this band, and they're not for everyone. People listen to the lyrics, first of all, because of his very deep English accent, and the way he sings it, people are like, oh, what is he saying? But when you listen to it with a passionate ear, you get to hear how beautiful his stuff is. Like I said, I'm a big fan of his. I've been a fan since the first time I heard So many, just like what Stephen had mentioned, so many of these albums, you listen to it, and when you read the album titles, you're like Heaven Born and Ever Bright, and you're like wondering what does he mean by that? But once you listen to the lyrics, or they actually read the lyrics, and then you find out where he gets these song titles from, as far as these album titles. But yes, Cardiacs, I'm actually looking forward to this. One of my favorite bands, pretty progressive, if you could call them that. All right.
All righty. Whoever one of you, Chuck, why don't you, since you were just talking, why don't you kick us off with your, what is it, number 7? Is that what you guys are doing?
My number 7. In my opinion, the band did 7 excellent albums, and it was kind of hard ranking, ranking the top 5, but in my opinion, perhaps their slightly weakest album, which I just mentioned, which is the album Heaven Born and Ever Bright, is my number 7. Not to say that it's not an excellent album, but in comparison to the albums that I'm going to pick, which are after this one, I would say that this one is probably just slightly weaker. There are a few songs on here. The Alphabet Business Concern has been a favorite song of one of their staples, a live staple from them. Goodbye Grace, She's Hiding Behind in the Shed, Core. So there are good songs on this album, which is still a pretty good album, but this is my number 7, Heaven Born and Ever Bright from the Cardiacs.
1992 on that one. I guess
yes.
That's 3rd studio album.
Yes.
Cool. I think this is going to be very interesting, because I think we might be quite different here. That's good. That's a very good thing, because I think also, as Chuck just mentioned there, this is really difficult to rank. Really difficult to rank. But what I've gone for as my number 7 is Duns. So this is the final, you would guess. There is still supposedly an album in the works, but how real that is or not, I'm not sure. So this is the band's last album, 1999. And to me, it's just the least, I would say, expansive. It's maybe a little bit more accessible, which is not really a word that the Cardiacs ever, even thought about. It was never on their agenda at all. But it's still a really strong effort. I mean, there's stuff like Will Bleed Amen on here. That's the band just really firing on all cylinders. And that song really has the kind of free spirit that, to me, lived in the heart of everything that went on with the Cardiacs. They were just individual and unmistakable. And I don't think it was on purpose. A lot of bands, you think, well, they're doing that so they got a point of difference. I always think the Cardiacs did it because, well, this is just who we are. All the albums sound really honest in that way. I just feel this is maybe a little diluted. It's a really good album, but I think it's maybe a little diluted, and it's the one that, to me personally, sounds least like the band that made it. You've got lots of vocals that are not by Tim on here, and that's not all that unusual, but I think that the vocals from Joanne Spratley, and I think it was Shara Saddington, they're just a little bit more to the forefront. They get longer in the spotlight, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't quite feel like the band that I knew all the way through the catalogue at this stage. So Duns is my number 7 from 1989. Still really good though, really good.
So I've noticed this whole catalog is on Alphabet Business Concern label. I'm not familiar with them. Is that their own label, or is that like strictly like a localized label from their area?
It was I think it was something that actually Tim that came along with. As mentioned, it was on the Heaven Born Ever Bright. It's the very first song on the album, and I guess that's what they named their label after.
Okay.
And if I can, one little tip for anyone who is maybe tempted to delve into this catalogue, looking at it now, as I did the other day, just out of interest, it's quite an expensive business, because a lot of these CDs would appear to be quite rare now. However, the bands or that site still has all of these CDs available, or just about, for sensible, normal prices. So don't go down the eBay and Discogs route. Nothing wrong with either of them. I use them all the time. But actually go to the band's site, and you'll find them there at certainly UK prices about £12.99. So not cheap, but not the kind of 15, 20, 30, 40 pounds that you find a lot of this catalogue is listed for on all the selling sites, and it's universally listed at that price because they are rare out in the market.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All right, back to Chuck, number 6.
Well, my number 6, as Stephen mentioned, is Guns. And I'm also very much in agreement because I was actually flopping between that and Heavenborn. This album over here, I don't know whether or not they were trying to go for a more commercial type of probably musical way. And so, but you listen to it, and like I said, there are some pretty good songs on it. The album is actually, once again, pretty good, but it's not Cardiac's like, it's not as blithering as as most of the stuff that came before then, and not as angry, but yet you could still see that some of Tim Smith's his love over here, because he was also doing other projects as well, like Spratley Japs, which is now called Spratley Rats. And also the Sea Nymphs. These were all the 2 bands that he was also involved with. The Sea Nymphs was a bit more of acoustic type of band, while Spratley Japs was probably a bit more alternative, more so alternative than it was Cardiac's like progressive feel to it. And also, we also have to push in Kavis Charabi as well, who's part of Knife World, now. He's probably the leader of the band now. We have to remember him. But getting back to Guns, I said Guns is just one of those albums where it just seems like there were a lot of ideas that he had, but just with this lineup in particular, because he's had many lineups throughout the group's history. This lineup just seemed to have a little bit too much influence on the making of this album and the final product. And that's why I say that this album, as good as it is, and so it's a bit weaker in comparison to their catalog. My number 6 is Guns.
I've noticed they got like a lot of female vocals on this album, and as well as strings and horns and things. Is that normal for them, or is this kind of like an outlier on this album?
It comes and goes.
Yes.
Is maybe the best way of putting it. There are some albums that have got all manner of brass, lots of strings, 3, 4, 5 different vocalists, all taking lead at certain points. And there are other albums that are basically, probably not exactly, but basically 4 guys. So it really does vary, and it seemed just to be what was happening at the time and who was involved. And there was a point where the lineup almost flipped in one kind of fell swoop. And that was actually my door in, because, as he's called, Random John Poole, I was aware of him through working with Ginger Wildheart. And so I'm really late to this band in that sense. My own story with the Cardiacs is I was handed a cassette of Heavenborn when I was about 17, and about there somewhere. Wow, I did not get it. I did not get it. I was not listening to anything like this at all, not even close. I'm just someone that I played drums, and this other guy played drums. And he went, I think you might really like this. These guys are out there. And I thought, yeah, I'm into some wild and wacky music. No, I wasn't.
Not like this.
I really wasn't. And because the first experience was just like, if you'll pardon my language, what the fuck was that? It really was that, wow, that's just like nothing I'm listening to at all. Took me a long time to even consider going back to them. So my back door in was that John Poole ended up, he was in the Cardiacs, and he actually really only left the band because he got so involved with the Wildhearts and Ginger Wildheart, and he's on the road all the time. So there was clearly lots of gigs. I would imagine it was quite a regular paid gig as well, which in the UK, if you're not in a massive act, that's vitally important if you want to exist as a musician. And Tim Smith, along with John Poole, and if my memory serves me correctly, Ginger Wildheart, he actually did an acoustic tour opening for Ginger and the Sonic Circus, which was a weird night where there literally was a circus in between Tim Smith and Ginger's band coming out, with people putting, like the big hooks through themselves and hanging themselves up by their nipples and things. It was not really my evening's worth of entertainment, that has to be said, but musically, it really was quite spectacular. And it was one of those moments where you're watching something that I half expected to think, not for me. And you're kind of standing there going, wow, I've really seriously missed the boat here, haven't I? So it's really only been the last 5 years where I've kind of thought, okay, let's investigate. And from there, it's just blossomed. So anyway, my number 6 is really good. It's Songs for Ships and Irons. What I really like about Cardiacs is that I feel that albums are albums. They're journeys. They're cohesive. I mean, they're wild and they're wacky and they're varied and they're challenging, but there always seems to be some sort of, to me anyway, some sort of thread that runs through them. They're quite themed musically, and purely on the fact that this is a compilation of unreleased other stuff or unreleased, not released on CD and various things. This doesn't hang together like that. Track for track, this is as good as anything that the band have done, because you've got the Big Ship EP, and that is, in old-fashioned terms, that would make up side 1 of this, and that's just phenomenal, has to be said. I mean, you've got All His Geese Are Swans, which is just, that's one of my favourite songs by the band. It's just ridiculous. It's that good. And the title track itself is amazing. Tarred and Feather is frenetic and jerky and just all over the place, but exactly where it needs to be. But then you move beyond that, and it's kind of B-sides and 12-inch singles that are kind of gathered together on the second half. But things like Loose Fish, Scapegrace,
great song.
That Verde's been a masterpiece. I mean, if you like stuff that is really quite challenging, give that a listen. If you haven't heard Cardiacs, well, I would suggest you sit down first, because it's quite something to take in. And that tells you all you need to know, because I'm talking about number 6 out of 7 here, and I'm waxing lyrical. I think if you get this, not get this band, it's not like that. If you connect with this band, then there's so little not to like. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, my number 6, Songs for Ships and Irons. That came out in 91.
Nice. But we'll be talking more about that album.
I thought we might.
More on that later, right?
Yeah. As mentioned, the 5 albums that are coming up, in my opinion, are definitely what makes up with the greatness of what many of their fans believe is the Cardiacs, the spirit of the Cardiacs right here. The very first album I ever heard from them, I remember purchasing this album back in sometime in the late 90s, as I mentioned before. And, and I happened to like them right away. So that the band had always mentioned, Tim Smith, he was a big progressive rock fan. And you hear it in a lot of the albums and a lot of the songs that they wound up producing afterwards. You hear bits of Genesis, you hear bits of King Crimson, Van de Graaff Generator, and Gentle Giant. Although he never physically mentioned Gentle Giant, but other members of the band were fans of them. This album over here, which although I have this version of it, the Seaside is my number 5. And this is where you get to hear a lot of those influences in the band. This is not real. It wasn't really an actual studio album itself. It's a compilation of songs that they had made prior to the album coming out, if I'm not mistaken, in 1989 or 88. There's just plenty of songs on here that wound up becoming live staples, like Gibber and Twitch, Gina Lola Brigida, forgive me.
I always have a
tongue tied. RES, to go off and things. A Hope Day. This is the album where if you really want to get into Cardiacs, I think this is like probably the best starting point of how to get into the band. But it's also not easy listening as well. But the Seaside in Cardiacs is my number 5. And like I said, from here onward, and so this is where, in my opinion, where you get to hear the band and what made their fans love them. So my number 5 is the Seaside.
That's basically like the original demo, correct?
Yes,
Much, yeah.
yes, compilation of a lot of stuff that they were doing prior to.
That's my number 5. There you go. And we both got the same edition, which is a shame because there's one with a completely different cover.
Yep.
Out there.
The crying clown.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And as Chuck says, I think it was a demo. It was a third of the demos. I think this is a bit of a collection of demos as well, but from, I think it was as early as 83, something like that along the way. And then it did get a vinyl release quite early, I think. But then the one that I'm holding and that Chuck was showing there, that's from 1990. I would suggest on it, I don't have it, I have heard all of it online, is that there's a 2015 version which has got the different cover and it's got all the stripes across the front. It's really quite striking. As with all the covers, it's not the nicest. None of them grab you and go, oh, great album cover, but they all make you think, what the hell's that about? But it's got all of the songs that were initially on the cassette. This doesn't, unfortunately. So there is more out there to go and find, but I really need to update in that sense. But even as early as this, what struck me about the Seaside is that you can hear exactly what this band are all about. I mean, the early stuff, it's not sonically as chiseled. It's not as jarring, I think, as what they would go on to do once they were, releasing full albums as such. But what they would want to do is still here. It's still right there, and it is a good starting point. I would agree with that. Vocally, it's really challenging. Tim and Jim are manic and wild and all over the place, and clearly just there are so few bands. There are lots of bands that are, we're going to do our own thing, but this band did their own thing. See, you're looking here, early 80s to mid 80s. Nothing sounded like this at that point. There's clear touching points from where they come from. But nobody sounded like this band does here. And same again, the only reason that it isn't higher is because I think they would then take this framework and improve on it once they actually were, releasing fully formed albums as such. But view this as an album, it's really good. So that's the Seaside, released in a variety of different years. And that's my number 5.
That album that album when you listen to it, like I said, the first time I heard it, I thought that I remember being referred to this album, and people were like, oh, if you like bands like Van de Graaff and Wire, you will like this group. And I didn't go in there with like truly high hopes, so I guess that's the reason why I wasn't jarred by it. I liked it from the beginning, like with a lot of their albums, except for the very first album that I actually mentioned earlier on. But like I said, it's you listen to the band, and if you're not really, my thing is that if you're not a fan of punk, like the Sex Pistols, the Damned, like very early part of that, and so it's going to be very hard to listen to this band. Philosophically and lyrically, I think he's probably Tim Smith was a bit more advanced than they were. But but when you listen to the band, you're like, oh my God, this voice.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting what you're saying there, because what I found with Cardiacs is that they have an ability to take a whole lot of influences that I maybe don't like. I mean, I do love Gentle Giant and Van de Graaff Generator and that kind of more. From what we talk about on the channel, my obvious kind of this is the sort of things that I would like. But they do manage to take influences from a more punk scene. I'm not really a punk head. I never really got it. I never really understood the kind of DIY ethos. And there is an element of that about Cardiacs too. They're not polished in any shape or form. And it is very much in your face. This is what we're doing. And if you don't like it, well, you can, and it is challenging in that way. But this is a band that seemed to be able, for me personally, to take influences from areas that I think, well, I wouldn't listen to that. And I wouldn't listen to this. I would listen to that and I would listen to this. But if you bring it all here, wow, how did they do that?
Fascinating combination.
Yeah, because things like, as you say, that like there's elements of the Specials and ska and various things like that. I don't really connect with that at all. There's elements of punk in there that you cannot avoid. I don't really connect with that at all. I don't really have very much punk in my collection. I'm aware of lots of it because people around about me listen to a huge amount of it. So I don't hate it. don't choose to listen to it. But I do like the more prog, and I do like the more avant-garde side of things. Bring it together. Those influences are definitely there. Definitely there. And I think, wow, why do I like this? I don't really care. I do.
There you go, right?
I really do.
I think we all have bands that, like, you know, when you really get down to it, you're like, I really shouldn't like this at all, but I do, right? And then and trying to figure out why is like the key question.
All right. So what this is, like I said, we're coming into the crux of what I believe is cardiacs over here. My number 4 is Song for Ships and Irons, as mentioned before. Which it's a compilation of all the songs that didn't make the album prior to this, which is at the time I think that most of these songs were from, I think if I'm not mistaken, with the Heldovers from Heavenborn, and as mentioned, you know, a lot of great songs on here. Big Ship is like one of their probably top 3 songs of all time. You know, the song that wound up becoming a B-side, Stone Age Dinosaurs. You know, it's a pretty laid back track. Tarred and Feathered. But once again, Loose Fish Scapegrace. You know, it's one of my top 5 cardiac songs of all time. And, you know, There's Too Many Irons in the Fire. You know, it's a lot of great songs on here. A lot of strange song titles, you know, a lot of tongue twisting over here. And then there's the instrumental, All His Geese Are Swans. You know, it's a pretty good instrumental. You know, their foray into like some type of progressive realm or so. But once again, my number 4 is Songs for Ships and Irons, Cardiacs.
So my number 4, and I've maybe ranked it a little higher because I have that kind of journey and story with it, is Heaven Born and Ever Bright from 1992. So yeah, as I say, I listened to this first when it first came out because I was handed a cassette. So I'm saying 17, 18, I must have been a little older than that, maybe 19. And I was a metal kid back then, really. There was elements of prog, there was Rush, there was Marillion, there was Genesis, and the kind of ones you would expect. I hadn't really delved all that deep at that point. But really, my musical taste was quite straight, really quite straight at that point. So to be handed this was just like, wow, people listen to this for fun. And it really has taken me so many years to then go back at it and go, wow, yeah, they listen to it for fun. Now I understand why they listen to it for fun. It's really good. And I really like it. And maybe you like it a little bit more because when I went back to it 20 years later, I still remember it because it's one of those things, you don't want to look uncool when you're in your late teens, do you? You know, and there's guys around about you, you think these guys know what they're talking about, you know, a little bit older than me, you know, I'm going to have to try hard with this. So I knew it really well, but still didn't like it at that point. But then you come back to it now, you've got to be honest, don't you? and I really like it now. I mean, there's stuff on here, like, I mean, Hell and in Heaven. I mean, even the song titles are brilliant. But it's dense and it's impactful. Snakes Are Sleeping, The Alphabet Business Concern, Home of Fadeless Splendor. How, I mean, not all of the song titles are lyrics, but how on earth these songs were sung, I have no idea. I can't say what the titles are. Never mind when you actually read the lyrics and you think, wow, how did he sing these things with such verve, such anger, such honesty? Wow, bonkers.
Snakes sleeping. She is hiding behind the shed.
Yep. Yeah.
Anything I can't eat.
You know,
straightforward. This is not. You know, put it that way. But yeah, as I say, I've got a real journey with this album, and this I probably listen to it more than I do some of the albums I prefer. Because this now takes me to a time and a place where I kind of shake my head about me more than anything else. But yes, I really like this now. Heaven Born and Ever Bright, that's my number 4.
It really is a damn good album. Like I said, although I ranked it as my number 7, and so that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a weak album. It's a damn good album. You know, like I said, everything that they've released over here, maybe I probably might have could have flip flop guns and that and so, but they really did put forth some pretty good stuff, and it's a pretty good album. Still love it, man.
This has been a really difficult ranking, I think, because sometimes you're wary of just saying everything's brilliant because you just sound like a complete fanboy. But everything's pretty brilliant here.
Yeah, you know, what's brilliant to us might not sound brilliant to other ears, you know, especially for the neophytes.
Okay, that's true.
I've tried. I guess I got to try harder. I don't know.
Yeah, no, like I said, there might be one album by them that you might love, or might appreciate. Forgive me.
I'll keep trying because this whole conversation intrigues a guy like me, and leads me to say, well, maybe I just haven't listened enough. Because I mean, there's plenty of bands that. I mean, Stephen, you told a great story before about how, you know, they were recommended to you. You're like, what the hell is this? And, you know, you go through a period where it's like, I just can't enjoy this. And then all of a sudden it clicks with you. Well, I mean, there have been plenty of bands that have done that to me. So I will continue to keep trying. So we'll leave it at that. Today, though, I don't get this at all.
Someday you'll visit it and you'll get to appreciate
Chuck, I'm sure it will happen because I like I said, I've done that plenty of times in my musical journey through life where I've been like, I just don't understand this band at all, and then all of a sudden one day it's like, oh, that's okay, right? I mean, hey, I did it with XTC. I used to not get that at all, and then all of a sudden it just kind of clicked with me, and I you know, so you never know.
I would say as in XTC, I would say there is hope for you here as well. Then,
Definitely, very well might be. Very well,
especially early XTC, very early.
Like those first 2-3 albums,
sure. About that, and so then you would appreciate them. Also, another band that I heard, well, the first time I ever heard Cardiacs that brought, especially that was the first band I ever thought of was Split Ends. You know, very early Split Ends. Maybe probably even throughout their entire career and so. I remember asking what's an insider about them, and they said that yes, that that Tim was a fan of theirs, but I don't know how much it was, how much of that influence was brought in there. But they always reminded me of Split Ends. Like I said, I listened to a lot of new wave and a lot of punk, and you know that's why I was able once again to appreciate this band over here. Now getting on to my number 3, this was very tough over here for me because these 3 albums that we're going to start listing over here, you know, they could easily have been my number 1, and they could have been my number 3. But my heart, when it came to this band over here, it was kind of tough picking these 3 over here. You know, most people obviously would pick one specific album as their all-time favorite. But like I said, any of these 3 could have been my number 1s. And my number 3.
Come on, Chuck. Say you just want to do a 3-way tie for number 1. Come on.
I didn't want to pull a mulligan now. Well, my number 3 is A Little Man and a House, and the whole world window. Oh gosh, you know, early in the morning trying to say all this over here.
What a mouthful for a debut, huh? Jesus. Let's confuse the entire buying public with our debut album. Holy cow!
This here, is? I said this could have easily been, in my opinion, their number 1 album. It contains their opus, and This Is the Life is probably the best song they've ever done. You know, then it has once again RES. You know, the Breakfast Line. You know, the title track is an amazing track too. Actually that title track on both ends, which is the bookends of both the albums. I mean, of the album, which is just an amazing album. That's my number 3. Could have easily been my number 1. A Little Man and a House and the Whole World Window. It's my number 3. Cardiacs.
Yeah, and more about that album later. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. I have had this list ready for a little while because we've spoken about this for a few weeks now. And I've sat down over the past couple of weeks and thought, you know, let's give them all another listen. I know them all really well. And then I really started to doubt what I'd chosen. As you do when you come to do these lists, you start to think, oh, well, can I really put that one any lower than where it is? But what would it drop? So anyway, my number 3 is possibly going to be other people's number 1. I think a lot of people hold Sing to God as the Cardiacs. That I think a lot of people say this is a double CD album. It's only around, I think, about an hour and a half, 90 minutes worth of music. It's not, thankfully, it's not 2 80-minute discs of overblown nonsense. This is one of the very few double CD, and I'll make that distinction because the length is different, double CD studio albums where I wouldn't take anything out. That normally when you get to the stage where bands are releasing double albums, you think, we are believing our own hype here. There's absolutely bugger all hype here. That's not what this is about in any shape or form. And there's a real flow to this album. That's what I was kind of getting at earlier on with how, to me, a compilation can't live up to the natural flow of what seems to happen here. Long songs into short songs, some are a few seconds long. I mean, I think there's only 4, 5 songs that go over 5 minutes on this. And that's not really what you would anticipate from a double album. But it's just, nothing stays in one place for too long, but there's a real cohesion. Everything is interlinked, and you can kind of hear little references back to what's come earlier, later on in the album. And when you've got songs like, and here we go, bonkers titles, Eat It Up Worms Hero, Man Who, Belly Eye, and Nurses Whispering Verses. It's a hell of a ride, this album. It really
Bell
is.
Stinks, Bell Clinks.
Bell clicks.
Red fire coming out from his gills.
Yeah. But I mean, you even look at the cover, right? Look at the cover.
Oh, my wife hates the album cover. She despises it.
How unfriendly is that album cover? That album says, do not buy this, doesn't it? I mean, it's obviously, you know, there's not one person that is properly hinged on this album cover. And it's brilliant because it really describes what's in it. There are a few album covers that I don't like, and I don't like this, where I look at it and go, yeah, it's perfect.
2 CDs, 90 minutes of music, horrible album cover. Yes, I'm buying it. All right.
They're even on the discs. Look, they're even going, yeah. So you put it down, you press it, and they kind of go, and you go, no. Mind-bending stuff. This is, as Chuck says, I'm at number 3 here. I could be at number 1. This is phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like the song lengths on this album, and yeah, you got like a couple of them that are like 8 minutes plus, but the majority of the album is 2 3-minute long songs.
Yeah, a lot of it joins together. Really, there's so much of it. There are some pauses and stops.
22 tracks.
To me,
yeah,
it's really, it's almost 2 tracks, 2 discs, 2 tracks. But there is so many points of differences on each song, even the short ones, but they all nod back to other things, and they all kind of hint to what's coming. It really says an awful lot about how to construct an album that has grand ideas and end up with a grand idea.
Yeah,
you know,
Indeed.
I would like to listen to this one. Yeah, and I have a question, and I probably, you guys should answer it after we're done with the rankings. But sure. I'm curious to know, what was their most successful album, and maybe we just revisit that when you're done with your rankings after you've already talked about each one of them. But I didn't want to forget that, because I'm very curious, because I know this band wasn't like a massive seller, but like I'm sure they had at least one album that was kind of more successful than the others. But we'll revisit that at the end of the discussion, I guess.
Sure. All right. My number 2, once again, just one of those albums that could have easily been my number 1. I said, I didn't want to pull one thing where I actually had it listed as my number 1 and then switch it back. This was a hard one, because I still think that, once again, that these albums that we're listing over here is essential or quintessential art, Cardiacs over here. And like I said, I was kind of debating on making this my number 1, but I left it as is. It's On Land and in the Sea, and in the Sea Cardiacs. Once again, a whole bunch of my number 2. The Ever So Closely Guarded Light could easily be the best song they've ever done, literally. What's that? Just an amazing album. Not a single weak track on this album. There isn't a single song on here. That, you know, although the titles of the songs are kind of weird. Two Bites of Cherry, you know, the Leaders of the Starry Sky, the Duck and the Roger, the Horse, Horsehead,
Fast Robert,
Fast Robert.
The stench of honey. I didn't know honey had a stench. I thought he smelled beautiful.
Listen to the song and you'll understand.
I guess so, right?
Exactly. I was just about to say, you'll understand. Like I said, this could have easily been number one. One of those amazing albums by this band, On the Land and in the Sea. Cardiacs is my number two.
And that is like a freaky album cover.
And it's my number two. I mean, even the album title, On Land and in the Sea, for some reason, it just doesn't roll off the tongue. Nothing that they do rolls off the tongue. I mean,
especially early in the morning.
Late in the day for me, that's why I'm slightly better not. To me, the best song here, and one of my favorite songs, is, and you've already mentioned it, The Duck and Roger and the Horse. It's just chaotic insanity, but nothing is chaotic insanity here. There are lots of bands over the years that you've maybe seen live, or you hear bits and bobs of, that you think that is just too many ideas rammed together and it genuinely makes no sense. I hope that nobody gets the impression that that's what we're trying to sell here, because that isn't what this is. These are thoroughly crafted, thoroughly thought about. I would guess not. This is not a band that jammed things out, because that would just crumple into nonsense if they tried that. But I almost view this album as someone attacking you with music. But then you thank them for doing it. You know, it's so jarring, it's so intense, it's so unapologetic for what it is. But it's great fun, and it's exuberant, and it's boisterous. And none of that happens at the cost of the song. There's no gimmick here. Two Bites of the Cherry, I mean, it's maybe only 3 minutes long, but the amount of ground that it covers is just bonkers. And the way that the instruments communicate with each other, it's an absolute joy when you realize what they're actually achieving, not attempting, but achieving. And then there's Baby Heart Dirt, the Leader of the Starry Skies. There's nothing here that falls below excellent, in my humble opinion. This is phenomenal. And as you say, the album cover is, I mean, it's basically going, just don't, you know, I mean, if you were flicking through, and I must have done at some point, flicking through that in a record shop back in the days, you would just go, nope.
I swear to God, I'm going to see that smiling dude on the cover in a nightmare tonight. I mean, it's so disturbing. I'm like, look at that. I'm like, ah.
Oh man! So their album covers don't make it any much easier. Oh man!
Right, drum roll number one, right?
Well, it's already been mentioned. We already knew that was going to be my number one. Let's Sing to God. I purchased Sing to God as two separate albums. You know, so I didn't purchase it as the what you have there, Stephen, which is the the double cassette. I mean, the double CD, which I bought this actually from ABC, their ABC records. And when I purchased it, I looked at it as two separate albums. Yes, I didn't. Mine didn't come like that.
As scary as that.
Yes. My wife hates it. You know, she looks at the album because she's, oh, please just put that away. I don't want to see that anymore.
Out of sight, please. See, she's with me with the whole nightmarish thing. She's probably like, God, if I look at that album cover one more time.
Oh man. You know, she saw this album cover when I had it over here on the desk, and she's like, "Oh, this album again." But it takes away from the beauty of this album. Everything on this album is so well polished. Yep. From the beginning song, "Eden on the Air," Eat Up Worm Heroes, but if you go further on into the album, it's 22 songs overall, and everything works on here. You get to see of the vision of Tim Smith with the band members that he has at this current moment. And, he also brought back a couple of members that hadn't played with the band for a few years. And he seemed to have gotten it all right on this album. This is not no attempt at The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway or The Wall, because every time you hear double albums from that type of region, and so those are the albums that they always compare it to. Nothing like those albums, and thank goodness it's not. You would think that most people would think that this is like a spiritual themed album, and so, but no, this is just an album an album title that he just came up with. And it just seems to work very well. My number one, Sing to God, Cardiacs.
And it's a really solid choice. It's as Chuck has mentioned, you've absolutely nailed it. The top three are interchangeable, and I really only have chosen an order because, well, that's what we're doing here. There are lots of bands out there where you think that's my favorite album, and it may change over the years, but you think, well, that's my favorite album. Cardiacs, I don't really have a favorite album. I just have lots of favorite albums. But they do love the word and. Doesn't Tim love the word and? A little man and a house and the whole world. And there's so many ands in the album titles and the song titles. And it's that little quirk that this seems to run through everything that they do. For me personally, this is the best example. I'm saying that because I've got it at number one. It's not the best example. It's my favourite example of the scope of what this band were all about. Something you mentioned earlier, Peter, is the variety of instruments that are involved. And I took a wee note here because you've got flute, you've got recorder, you've got sax, I think 2 types of sax, clarinet, all manner of percussion. There's trombones, there's trumpets, there's flugelhorn, there's violin, there's a host of different instruments here. Yes, yeah. This should make no sense. This should be an absolute mess. I mean, to corral this into kind of honed, refined rock music or prog would be difficult enough. But to actually mold this into something as uncompromising as what Cardiacs were is really some feat. It shows, I mean, we're having a laugh. We're talking about the titles and the covers and various things. But I think that the message that we're both trying to get across here is this is serious music by serious musicians here. You couldn't create this kind of music if you didn't 100% understand what you were trying to do. And then to be able to achieve it, as I've said before, that's the thing. Lots of people try, and I think very few actually manage it. If you don't think that they should fall into the world of prog, I would suggest that you go and listen to, as Chuck mentioned, the bookends of this album. So that is A Little Man and a House and The Whole World Window. And it suddenly makes sense of the album title too.
Yes.
As to be said, it's not very many albums that are genuinely named after 2 songs, but I love the way that it is. And then they come at the start and at the end of the album. See, there's a real prog nod, isn't it? That's the sort of thing that you would find on some overblown concept album, which this is not, I may add. But they're great pieces of music. They're intrinsically linked, yet they're completely different. But what comes in between, is this the life? I mean, on other hands, that would just be straightforward, throwaway. But it is maybe as straightforward as this band becomes, and there are some moments as you go across the albums where suddenly you go, wow, a groove, and you think, okay, there's a hook. There's lots of hooks, but they bury them real deep. And I mean, that's basically a new wave song, but it would never have been a hit if your life depended on it, because that's not what they're trying to do. From RES, which as we mentioned was also on the Seaside, to In a City Lining, I just can't find fault with this anywhere. And prog, whatever you want to call it, avant-garde, progressive, punk, rock, whatever it may be, this to me is that at its best. So that is my own personal favourite, and I'll say it one last time: A Little Man and a House and The Whole World Window from 1988.
Rolls right off the tongue, right?
Before we go into other forts, you also have to look at their live albums too. We didn't want to put, because they have so many, and I remember Stephen mentioning that he wasn't a big fan of collecting live albums, but you do have Cardiac's Live, which is an amazing album. They have what's their live stuff, Rude Bootleg. They also have what they call the archive of Cardiacs. They've had their share of live albums, which are all amazing. And you would think that they wouldn't be able to play these songs, play and sing these songs, but a lot of the songs that they do have, that would become live staples of theirs, sound even more amazing live. So that's just my take on there. So as far as their live stuff as well.
So as has been discussed briefly on a few different shows that I've been on, I like live albums, and I've got lots of live albums. However, if I've got however many album pounds in my hand, I will instinctively go and buy a CD that's got 10, 11, 12 songs that I've never heard before. That's why I buy more studio albums than I do live albums. I don't dislike a live album. However, that's just where I veer. I'm very intrigued because one of my regrets is that I saw Tim Smith live, which was fantastic, but it wasn't the Cardiacs. That was not what that gig was. That was a Tim Smith show. It was kind of half billed as Cardiacs because John Poole was there, but it wasn't a Cardiacs lineup and it wasn't a full show. And as an opening act on what was an excellent but interesting evening with all the bizarre acts that came afterwards, it didn't quite have the impact, the lasting impact, because by the time that you'd seen all this bizarre things through the tongue and all this sort of stuff, you'd kind of forgotten what had happened. And then there was the band that everyone in inverted commas had paid to see came on at the end. But the Cardiacs actually opened for the Wild Hearts around 2004, and that must be one of the very few tours that I didn't go and see the Wild Hearts. Or my kids were young at that stage and various things, and sometimes you do more gigs than others and miss ones that you think, why didn't I go to that? So I never saw them live. So how different are the live versions? Are they wildly different? Do they bring a whole lot of new different things to it? I'm totally intrigued. I need to go and buy some of these.
I said, Cardiacs Live, amazing, which probably might not sound as polished, as cleanly polished, recorded, but still an amazing album. Then you have All That Glitters is a Mare's Nest, the one with the dog and which are on the cover. I have it, but I just didn't print it out myself. And so this album over here has all their great stuff on it.
Yeah, that's like almost 80 minutes long. That's the one I was just looking at. So that probably features a good chunk of the best of their repertoire. Yeah. Yes.
And then you also have a Rude Bootleg, which sounds just like a bootleg, but still has a lot of amazing albums. A lot of songs on there as well. So I would say that those three, and then there's one that they did probably later on in their career, which was released I think in 2015, which is a compilation of it's like this amazing live album that they recorded, and they've both filmed and recorded. I forget the name of the album. I don't have it over here, and so, but that's another great album that probably would be best looking at as well.
Yeah, they got something called the Special Garage Concerts.
Yes, that's what I mean. The Special Garage. Forgive me.
Okay. Yeah, All That Glitters is a Mare's Nest looks interesting because just from the number of songs that are covered on that live album. Although you got the Cardiacs Live, which is from '88. Yeah, cool. A lot of stuff.
What year is Mare's Nest?
All That Glitters is a Mare's Nest.
What year was that released?
95, but it was recorded in 90, but released in 95. Right,
okay. I'm just trying to work out what album takes in what era, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if that was recorded in 90, so you're talking right around the time of after On Land and Sea, right?
So you think about all the amazing songs that were recorded that day, during that concert.
Yeah. this is going on too long. Are they vastly different in terms of tracks, Chuck? Do you get
yes,
different?
yes, mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'm really just going by the three of them that you suggested, and then work out from there. Good, that'll do.
Yeah, I mean I've kind of feel the same way about like bands who release a lot of live albums, and it's a lot of the same songs on the live albums. It's like I'm a big fan of like bands who have a definitive live album. Like that's the live album. It's got all the great stuff on there, great performance, legendary, and maybe you don't need any more, right? You have that, but you know that's not always the case. I mean, Iron Maiden, I'm talking to you. It's like, you know, how many live albums has Iron Maiden had over the years? It's like, I don't need any more of them. It's like enough already.
Pete, think about your shirt. What's that? Strangers in the Night, UFO.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
That,
you got one.
Amazing.
I mean, they've had others, but you got one. That's all you need, right? That's all you need.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, there are bands out there, I think, like bands I like, Dream Theater, Uriah Heep, who have ended up with so much live product that it dilutes it for me.
Yep.
You know, it's album, live DVD, live album. And there's more live, official live material. I mean, Uriah Heep did a whole official bootleg series where they were just releasing that, you know, live show after live show after, and I love that band. I don't need all that. I mean, I waxed lyrical about Marillion. Go on their website, you could buy hundreds, and I mean hundreds. I mean, it puts King Crimson into the shade in terms of live albums.
Yep.
I mean, it's mind blowing. And would I like them all? Of course I would. Could I listen to them all? No. I couldn't. So I end up just compromising and doing very little of the live stuff. And I know with bands like Crimson, I am missing out. And I did get the impression.
Yeah, I mean, all I said before, I've got like 20 live King Crimson CDs, right? Deep Purple too. So there are some bands that I'm very forgiving on that, but some not, right?
And I think that with Cardiacs, I'm genuinely, once we're finished here, I'm going to go and buy some live albums, because I feel that they're a band where you listen to the live album and think, okay, I've got a different message entirely now from what happened on the studio album. And I'm saying that without having heard them. But the ethos about the band was always, let's do the unexpected. Let's go over the edge. We don't live life on the edge. We don't know where the edge is. Let's just keep going and see what happens. And I think in terms of a live document, I find that quite an exciting prospect. So I'm going to go and do my own homework after this one.
All that glitters. It should be the number one. Then second is Cardiacs Live.
Sure.
Cool. So back to my question before. So in your opinion, guys, did they have were any of their albums somewhat successful that people generally, you know, was any of them somewhat of a breakthrough, or was this band just pretty much underground the entire time?
Wow, that's a really difficult question to answer. I would suggest that they were always at the top of the underground. They never quite broke through. I mean, even back in those days, I mean, late 80s into the 90s, Top of the Pops and things like that were still big over here. This band were never going to appear on TV and on those terms. They were never going to be something that, you know, you would sit down with your mother and your auntie to watch on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock in the evening. That was never going to happen, you know? The only album that I ever heard other people talking about round about me at this stage was the Heaven Born and Ever Bright album. And I would suggest that that's maybe, although it's neither our favourites, I mean, it's still a great album. I would suggest that's as near as they came to kind of getting a name. I would say that by the time that Sing to God came out, I think that the musical landscape had moved on so much from where they were, even though they were never going to be flavour of the month with the kind of thing that they were doing. Every now and again, a band that are out there doing something wild can transcend that into the kind of wider sphere. I think by the time that Sing to God came out, which I haven't put at number one, Chuck has, but it is probably the best album, in inverted commas. I think the ship had already sailed in terms of them making that breakthrough. And then from there, obviously, things started to happen, and the band kind of it evolved in different ways and various things. And
because I mean, you know, none of these albums charted. And no singles, right? Like, you know, no radio play. It's although what I've heard from the band, that's not very surprising, but
I would imagine you would maybe have found this band on things like John Peel over here in the UK, who everyone will know as a legendary DJ that championed lots of great music and lots of rubbish too. If I was to be careful, it annoys me that anything that has the name John Peel next to it is now held up as it must be brilliant. He championed some nonsense. However, he championed some amazing music, and that's the sort of band that's the only kind of place I can imagine them getting close to mainstream was if he had backed them. It feels like the sort of band he might have done. But certainly over here in the UK, there just wasn't an outlet for music like this. You either managed to grow it organically or you didn't. And unfortunately, they didn't really. It never really happened in those terms. And I actually think that they were quite happy with that. I don't know if they would have known what to done with fame.
Well, because they were such a cult band, you know. So you have to probably perhaps if you look at the more famous bands that they influenced, Blur was the band Blur, which was really not that famous over here, and so because of their egocentrically British nature, you know, like a lot of bands of that nature, and so which have really never crossed over here in the US, but yet the band Blur, which are all the members, you know, even after Tim Smith had died, you know, they had had a lot of things in regards to praising how great the band was. Tool, the band Tool, which is famous in this country, both in the UK and the US, have members that were influenced by them. The metal band Napalm Death was also influenced by them. Mr. Bungle, you know, which was a band that was that if you could ever think about a band that was close in nature, was that band. The band Foles, you know, rather newer band, which is very much influenced by them. As mentioned before, Stephen, a few months ago, Scaramanga 6, you know, was a band that was influenced by them, heavily influenced by them. You know, so you know, you do have bands that were influenced by them, that might have brought their name to the mainstream, but they did have one song that happened to make like the alternative rock scene. It charted there. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was on. Let me see what album was on, because I don't want to make any mistake in regards to that, and then have people coming down my throats on this. But they did have one song that happened to chart on the alternative rock scene that got a few some big airplay. But no, it's just been a hard band to pigeonhole, or at least to put within some type of genre that people would like. But no, it's very hard for them for people to get into them. So I could see why there's a lot of disdain for them as well.
Well, I guess they'll. No, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add in, as I would, to that list of bands that were influenced by them, that I would say my door in was definitely the Wild Hearts.
Yes.
So there are points with the Wild Hearts where they're quite a rocking, punking pop band. However, there are times where they're not. There are albums like Fishing for Luckies or the Wild Hearts album where they go a little more progressive. I would hold Fishing for Luckies up as a prog album in those terms. It's not, but to me back then, I was listening to these albums thinking, wow, nobody's ever doing stuff like this before. This has never happened before. And it was only once that band and Ginger Wildheart and started to mention Cardiacs and try and give Tim Smith a little bit more acclaim than he had ever really achieved to that point, that I went, oh wow, okay, somebody else did do this. There's really direct influences there where you think, I can completely understand now where this kind of stop-start, let's head in this direction and then go in that direction comes from. I hadn't really experienced music like that until I got into the Wild Hearts, but they did it in a much more accessible way, even though they're not the most accessible band in the world. They did it in a much more accessible way. Cardiacs did it in a way where they just went, well, if you can't hold on, you'll just fall off the back. They really care. But the variety of bands that you've mentioned there, and same again, some that I would imagine we both really like, and some not so much. I mean, Blur is not my music at all, but yes, they hold this band up as an influence, and you can hear it in there.
Radiohead.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely with Radiohead. Tool, there's a band I love. And you can hear that influence there too. Do any of them sound like Cardiacs? No, but kind of. It's really fascinating that they do seem to be one of those touchstone acts where so many excellent musicians have listened to them and just taken, I'll have this bit, thank you, and then gone and done something different with it, you know? So
that's kind of what I was going to say before. It's like, it's amazing. And there have been numerous bands in history that have done this where they don't quite click with the masses, but yet fellow musicians and fellow bands find tremendous influence on them, and they become such an influential band, even though their albums haven't sold shit and they never got played on the radio, and the mainstream never caught on to them. And that's why every now and then you'll see, like, I'll use the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as an example. Like sometimes you'll see these bands that get nominated to be in the hall that, the casual fan, like, I never heard of half of these bands, but people in the music business know full well who they are and really value their contributions to music history. And, maybe the Cardiacs at some point in time may be one of those bands based on what we just talked about.
Yeah, I would say so.
Cool.
Oh.
So for everybody watching, if you are a Cardiacs fan, please rank the albums as you like them down in the comments below. And if you've never listened to this band at all, go give them a try. Come back and let us know what you think. As you probably can surmise, this is probably a band you're going to have to give some time to. I personally haven't given them enough. What I've given them, they haven't clicked with me, but I am going to go back because I'm now very intrigued by some of the albums that I have not listened to, that I'm thinking, maybe I'll find something to love and Sing to God or Heaven Born and Ever Bright. And I think the only album I've ever listened to was the first album, but I want to go and revisit that one as well. So, because I think that I remember hearing things, you know what was the blocker for me, guys? The vocals.
The vocals, yeah. No,
I knew what you were about to say. Yeah.
That's it. There are bands like that. Like I said, we mentioned Radiohead. How many people are like, oh my God, I can't stand Tom York's whiny vocals. But but a lot of people tend to like that. When you come to Tim Smith, you listen to his fast, eccentrically English accent and so on. You're like, oh my God, what is he saying? But once you get into it, you'll love it, man. It's a band that, well, I said, they're not for everyone.
I liken his vocals to somebody having an argument with themselves.
Well, I get to see a lot of that in New York City on the subway.
Oh yeah, sure you do. Chuck is living that dream every day.
Every day, every morning, every evening. Oh man,
I don't miss that at all. Holy cow. Subway riding is not for me anymore at this stage.
Oh man. If I could find alternative modes, I would do it, but that's my everyday thing.
Yeah, you got to. So cool. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. So if you love the Ranking the Album shows, well, don't touch that dial. We've got 2 coming up for you tomorrow. We're going to visit some Italian prog, pasta prog. We've got Rand Kelly, Ken Gold, and myself. We're going to be ranking our top 5 albums from Banco, Del Mutuo Soccorso, otherwise known as Banco, and then PFM, otherwise known as Premiera Fernario Marconi. I always get tongue-tied saying these things. So that's coming up tomorrow, so stay tuned for that, and a lot more here on the channel. And of course, Stephen's coming right back in just a couple hours. We've got the UK connection. Our favorite and least favorite Judas Priest albums is the discussion of the day, so that's happening later today. And then we've got tomorrow on album homework assignment, we have Sean Tonar going head-to-head with George Lamy. So that should be a fun show as well. So that's all happening this weekend here on Sea of Tranquility. So thanks for watching. And for Stephen Reid and Chuck Alvarez, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. But we'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Enjoy. Thank you.